Okay, let's do this. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to session number 223 of Kevin Reads A Course in Miracles. Today, we are beginning chapter 29. It's the last three chapters in the text, 29, 30, 31. So we're starting chapter 29, which is entitled The Awakening. Right. And the first section, section 1, Roman numeral 1, I, is entitled The Closing of the Gap. Alrighty. So we're talking about that little gap that's miscreated by the thought of separation. We have that thought of separation, and all of a sudden now we believe there's a gap between us and the oneness. And refer to it any way you like, any way that makes you less uncomfortable. All right. The Course uses the term God. Okay, so it's that little gap that we have between ourselves and God, our Creator, our primal source, right? The oneness, the totality, the spaciousness. We believe there's a little gap. We're separated from it. Okay, so this is entitled The Closing of the Gap. Paragraph 1. There is no time, no place, no state where God is absent. There is nothing to be feared. There is no way in which a gap could be conceived of in the wholeness that is His. The compromise the least and littlest gap would represent in His eternal love is quite impossible. For it would mean His love could harbor just a hint of hate. His gentleness turns sometimes to attack, and His eternal patience sometimes fail. All this do you believe when you perceive a gap between your brother and yourself. How could you trust Him then? For He must be deceptive in His love. Be wary then. Let Him not come too close, and leave a gap between you and His love, through which you can escape if there need be for you to flee. If there be a need for you to flee. All right. So he says, he makes that, as Dr. Wapnick would say, a level 1 statement. There is no time, no place, no state where God is absent. All right, that essence is always around us, in us. It is us. There's no place where it is not. All right, he says there is nothing to be feared. There is no way in which a gap could be conceived in the wholeness. Right? There's no way that the separation could be possible. So don't be afraid. Right? There's no way separation could be possible. Okay. Because if it were possible, it would mean that his love could harbor a little hint of hate. And His gentleness could sometimes turn to attack. And His eternal patience fail. As I read this, and as I read it, I just think of the God of the Old Testament. Okay. Obviously, seen through the eyes of the ego. All right? There would be compromises. His gentleness would sometimes turn to attack. His love can harbor hate. Right? His eternal patience sometimes fail. Right? I told you not to look back. Right? He says, and then he tells us, he says, you believe this when you perceive there's a gap between your brother and yourself. All right? When we hear in this form, in this dream, perceiving others, he says, this is what you believe. This is what you believe. When you think there's a gap, when you perceive a gap between your brother and yourself. All right? So when you perceive a gap between your brother, the other, and yourself, how could you trust him? How could you trust God? How could you trust the others that you see? Right? Because they must be deceptive. Right? Because I, deep down inside, see myself as deceptive. Right? I'm the one that took away the power of creation. Right? I slipped away from the oneness. I'm the deceiver. But I project it out onto everyone. You can't trust anybody. Right? You can't trust them. How could you trust him then? For he must be deceptive in his love. So his love must be like a trick. Right? Because the God, take the God of the Old Testament. He loves you one minute and next minute he's destroying your city. He loves you one minute and next minute he's sending a flood. All right? All kinds of things. Smoting people. All right? But I thought he loved me. Yeah, well. Today he's smoting people. All right, so how could you trust that? Right? He must be deceptive in his love. He says, be wary then. Don't let him come too close. So this is what goes on in the mind. We can't let God come too close. We can't let our brother come too close. See, it all gets projected. These thoughts, they just manifest in the illusion, in the dream. All right? Remember the symbols in the dream. And Jesus would tell you this whole thing is a dream. Observe the symbols. Be wary then. Let him not come too close. And leave a little gap between you and his love. Right? Through which you can escape if there need be. If there be a need for you to flee. If there be need for you to flee. Jesus likes to speak in tongue twisters sometimes. Right? So that's it. We always have that doubt. I'm going to get tricked. Right? I'm going to get betrayed. Right? Because I betrayed the oneness, so I think, deep down inside. Deep down in the depths of my mind. Right? Which is what we are trying to bring to the surface in a very Freudian way. We're trying to make the unconscious conscious. And as Freud, one of his big things was dreams. And Jesus tells us this is a dream. This whole thing is a dream. He says, what's the difference between your waking and sleeping dreams? All right, so just be observant. Become a lucid dreamer. And don't judge yourself. Judgment is where we get caught. We think, yes, I'm I'm a scurvy worm. I've done all kinds of bad things. Don't judge yourself. Just don't judge yourself. Just observe. There's reasons why you've done the things you've done. And more than likely, you're not doing those things now. But when we look in the past, we get these, well, I do, all of a sudden, just a memory pops up out of nowhere. And it's, I have a reaction to it. Right? Usually it's shame. But that's the point where you just don't judge yourself. If you really have a hard time, it's a time to go to your mind and go to your higher self and say, help me to see this. Help me to see this correctly. Help me to see it differently. I don't want to see myself as shameful. Okay? And that becomes the process. But what he's telling us here is that you don't trust anything, because we perceive this separation between us and the oneness, between us and the others that are here in the illusion with us. So he says, you always got to keep that back door. Always got to have an escape route, a plan. As I was rereading this, I was remembering most phases of my life, especially when I started hanging out with people. Some of them, they just scared the living daylights out of me with their antics. Antics is a nice word for it. So after a while, I would insist, I'll take my car. I'll go by myself. I'll meet you there. Things like that. But, may seem trite, but that's the way we behave in relationships. Right? I'll go this far, but I need to have that back door. I need to have that escape, right? Through which you can escape if there be a need for you to flee. All right. Paragraph 2. Here is the fear of God most plainly seen, for love is treacherous to those who fear. Since fear and hate can never be apart. No one who hates but is afraid of love, and therefore must he be afraid of God. Certain it is, he knows not what love means. He fears to love and loves to hate. And so he thinks that love is fearful and hate is love. This is the consequence the little gap must bring to those who cherish it and think that it is their salvation and their hope. All right, so that he's telling us that those of us who cherish the thought of separation, namely all of us, all right, he says that these are the consequences, right? Because deep down inside, we think love is treacherous. It's going to trick us somehow. Right? And he says, love is treacherous to those who fear. Right? The moment we believe in separation, we're afraid. We're afraid of retribution. We become guilty over the separation. Oh, I did it. No, now I feel terrible. I'm going to get punished. There it is. Guilt demands punishment. I become afraid. Oh, I'm going to get punished now. And it all works very quickly. Very quickly. And love becomes treacherous to those who fear. Don't come too close to love. It's going to get you. And fear and hate can never be apart. All right? if just notice in your own lives, oh, I hate that, I hate that. You're probably afraid of it, all right? I mean, because as the theory goes, about anger, which is, very close to hatred. If we think the more anger we invest in something, the safer we are, right? And why do I need to be safe? Because I'm fearful. So if I invest anger and hatred into something, I'll be less fearful, so the ego tells me. Right? So he's telling us it can't. It goes like this, fear and hate, they're like that. They can never be apart. And then he says, no one who hates but is afraid of love. All right. And this is where he gets those sentences where you have to stop and reread it. What he's saying is that everyone who hates, anyone who hates, is afraid of love. Right? And he says, and therefore, deep down in the mind, in the well of the mind, they're afraid of God. Because the oneness, the God, the Creator, for lack of a better word, is love. And we become afraid of that. Because in the presence of that, the gap disappears, the gap closes, the form disappears, my individuality disappears in the presence of the truth. And so it manifests in all different fears of God and fear of love, So no one who hates but is afraid of love. So anyone who hates is afraid of love. And therefore, he must be afraid of God. Certain it is, he knows not what love means. Jesus tells us this, maybe I think it's in the introduction to the text. This course is not about love because you don't know the meaning of that. You can't comprehend it. As we're trying to describe God as love, it just becomes words, becomes theory, really, until you experience that. Right? And certain it is, he knows not what love means. He fears to love and loves to hate, and so he thinks that love is fearful and hate is love. Right? Hate becomes love in the bargains that we make. Disguised as love. All kinds of bargains that we make with others. Okay? This is referencing what Jesus calls in the Course and prior sections the special relationships. And so he fears, and so he thinks that love is fearful and hate is love. This is the consequence of the little gap must bring to those who cherish it. So, because this is what happens when you believe in separation. You become afraid of love. Approach avoidance. Right? You want that, but you're afraid of that. Because you think it's going to devour you. Okay? And this is the consequence the little gap must bring to those who cherish it. And think that it is their salvation and their hope. Right? To those who think that the thought of separation is their salvation. I'm an individual, here I am. All right? I can do whatever I want. Paragraph 3. The fear of God, the greatest obstacle that peace must flow across, has not yet gone. The rest are past. but this one still remains to block your path and make the way to light seem dark and fearful, perilous and bleak. You had decided that your brother is your enemy. Sometimes a friend, perhaps, provided that your separate interests make your friendship possible a little while, but not without a gap perceived between you and him, lest he turn again into an enemy. Let him come close to you, and you jumped back. As you approach, did he but instantly withdraw. A cautious friendship, limited in scope and carefully restricted in amount, became the treaty that you had made with him. Thus, you and your brother but shared a qualified entente, in which a clause of separation was a point you both agreed to keep intact. And violating this was thought to be a breach of treaty not to be allowed. Jesus is using the language of nations. Thus, you and your brother but shared a qualified entente. Okay, we'll be friends, but right. And it's not that distinctly spoken, but when you think about it, oh yeah, that's what I do. I don't want to belabor the point, but like in the place where I live, there's a lot of apartments, and I really like where we live. So there's a lot of neighbors, but it's usually good morning, good afternoon, hi, how you doing, bing bang, maybe some inconsequential conversation in the elevator if you happen to be in the elevator, but doesn't go any further than that. And sometimes I joke with Gene, it's like, I like to say hello to people, okay? And, you say hello to somebody and it's like, whoa. Some people are very obvious. They don't want to, it's like, okay. It's like, I don't want to come to your house for dinner or anything. I just want to say hello. But that's the idea. You don't want people to come too close, right? Don't get too friendly, And that's the way of the world. You can see how it works in your own life to whatever degree that goes on. Some people are very gregarious. They like having company and this and that. And, but even that is a certain point, And we do that in our relationships. There's that unspoken bargain until it needs to be spoken, right? Then you realize that you and the other are sharing what Jesus calls a qualified entente, in which a clause of separation was a point you both agreed to keep intact. We come this close, but no closer. All right? And violating this was thought to be a breach of treaty not to be allowed. Okay. I mean, once you become aware of it, you see it. And once again, it's not to be judged as good or bad. It just is. That's the way things go when we think we're separated from the oneness. And obviously, I think I'm separated from the oneness. Right? So observe these things. And when we're having reactions, we go inside. And we're asking the higher self, right? Symbolized by Jesus, Holy Spirit, unconditional love, that we're asking, help me to see differently. Help me to see differently than what the ego is showing me. I want my perceptions corrected because I want to get closer and closer to the oneness and not be afraid of it. I want to close the gap and not be afraid of the oneness, not be afraid of losing form. Paragraph 4. The gap between you and your brother is not one of space between two separate bodies. And this but seems to be dividing off your separate minds. It is the symbol of a promise made to meet when you prefer, and separate till you and he elect to meet again. And then your bodies seem to get in touch, and thereby signify a meeting place to join. But always is it possible for you and him to go your separate ways. Conditional upon the right to separate, will you and he agree to meet from time to time and keep apart in intervals of separation, which do not protect you from the sacrifice of love, which do protect you from the sacrifice of love. The body saves you, for it gets away from total sacrifice and gives you the time in which to build again your separate self, which you truly believe diminishes as you and your brother meet. Right, so he's describing in pretty general but quite specific terms how we meet, all right, and then there's that agreement to only come this far, and then, okay, now everybody go back to your corners, as they would say in the pugilistic terms, all right, conditioned upon the right to separate. All right, you maintain that right because we believe that love will devour us. Because that's, a lot of times that's the experience here in the dream, in the ego system. We have that desire for love. We make the mistake, this is what love is. And next thing you know, I'm destroyed. And so as I go along my path and get older, I want to go this far. I don't want to get destroyed again. I don't want to get destroyed. All right? And we believe that's what's going to happen if I encounter the oneness. All right? This is the gap between you and your brother is not one of space between two separate bodies. It's in the mind. That's where the gap is. And this but seems to be dividing off your separate minds, right? The body. It's the symbol of a promise made to meet when you prefer and separate till you and he elect to meet again. So we keep that kind of behavior going. And then your bodies seem to get in touch and thereby signify a meeting place to join. But always is it possible for you and him to go your separate ways. All right? So I mean, it's pretty clear. All right? So the body saves you. All right? It saves you from being destroyed by love. All right? Jesus works that in there. Because we think that, well, he's saying that's why you invest belief in the form, because it saves you from getting too close to love. Right? I keep thinking of something I heard Ram Dass say one time. And ironically enough, I'm wearing a Ram Dass shirt where it says, "We're all just walking each other home." But I was just thinking of what, believe me, that's just happenstance. But he says that's the biggest fear along the spiritual path, is that thought that we're going to lose form and our true essence is abstract. And it doesn't make you bad, it just keeps you holding on to the form. And holding on to form, you're just ultimately not peaceful. Right. Well, let's see, there's a tendency to be miserable because you can find peace, and then the next step is the awareness of who you really are. So, the body saves you, for it gets away from total sacrifice and gives you the time in which to build again your separate self, which you truly believe diminishes as you and your brother meet. So, when we have a relationship, there's what they call the give and take. All right? And unless you're getting a little bit more than you're giving, you think that you're diminished. Right. All these things are just become observant, not judgmental. Just observe. Because as egos, when we're seeing everything through the eyes of the ego, through the belief in separation, you can't help but act this way. This is the way it goes. It's what egos do. So don't judge yourself. Just notice, oh, this is what egos do. I don't want to do that anymore. And then go ask your true self in the mind. Ask for help. Okay, paragraph 5. The body could not separate your mind from your brothers unless you wanted it to be a cause of separation and of distance seen between you and him. Thus do you endow it with a power that lies not within itself. And herein lies its power over you. For now you think that it determines when your brother and you meet, and limits your ability to make communion with your brother's mind. And now it tells you where to go and how to go there, what is feasible for you to undertake and what you cannot do. It dictates what its health can tolerate and what will tire it and make it sick. And its inherent weaknesses set up the limitations on what you would do and keep your purpose limited and weak. All right. That first sentence that he said, the body could not separate your mind from your brothers unless you wanted it to be a cause of separation. All right? He's telling us your body doesn't do anything. Right? It follows directions. That's it. All right? So we have this, and this is what we're trying to make unconscious, to make conscious. To make the unconscious conscious. What it is that I'm thinking, what it is that I'm directing my body to do. Right? Otherwise you say, oh no, it's like your body's in charge. It tells you what to do. It tells you where you can go. It tells you how you feel. Right? And it keeps your purpose limited and weak. And your true purpose is the extension of everything, right? The extension of the spaciousness the words are limiting. The extension of love. Right? That's our true purpose. Right? But we give the body power, and it makes our purpose limited and weak. Right? So that whole idea of separation weakens us. We see ourselves as weak. In reality, we're not weak. We're still in the oneness. So its inherent weaknesses set up limitations on what you would do. Paragraph 6, the body will accommodate to this if you would have it so. It will allow but limited indulgences in love, with intervals of hatred in between. And it will take command of when to love and when to shrink more safely into fear. It will be sick because you do not know what loving means. And so you must misuse each circumstance and everyone you meet, and see in them a purpose not your own. So he says, look, the body will do whatever you want. Right? If you want to keep your purpose limited and weak, right, the body will say, okay, we'll have limited indulgences in love, whatever we think love is, here in this experience, with intervals of hatred in between. And the body will take command of when to love and when to shrink more safely into fear. And the body will be sick because you do not know what loving means. And he tells us you don't know the meaning of love. And this whole text is to remove the blocks to the awareness of love, the awakening, the chapter heading. So we're trying to remove the blocks to the awareness of love and its meaning. He says, but up until that point, you don't know what it is. You're guessing. So it will take command of when to love and when to shrink more safely into fear. It will be sick because you don't know what loving means. And so you must misuse each circumstance and everyone you meet, right? And see in them a purpose not your own. Right? That purpose not our own, I truly believe is what he means, that we don't trust them. Right? So they have a purpose. They're trying to get more than they give. They're trying to, but we're the ones that initially thought there must be something more than the oneness. I want to get that. So I thought that, and I believed I accomplished it. So deep down inside, everyone I meet is trying to get something from me. So I see in them a purpose that's not mine. I've projected my purpose onto them, right? I'm not the one who's trying to get something from someone. Right? I project that purpose onto them. So I misuse every circumstance and everyone that I meet. I'm trying to get something. Right? And then I project it onto them. And believe me, it is possible in this experience of form that we can have a relationship in where we don't want anything. Therefore, I don't need to trick anybody. I just want to present as a channel of love. Quite possible in this experience of form. All right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to by closing the gap, right? We're coming into the right mind, right? Where the truth is, the gap closes. Right? And then we come back into the gap, but we bring it with us. And little by little, that awareness grows until there is an awakening. Right? But in the meantime, we can more and more show up in relationship as a being that is not looking for anything. Right? And I wouldn't judge myself if there is something I'm getting from the relationship. Right? I'm grateful for what I get from my relationships. Right? It's just that I'm not trying to trick anybody to get these things. Just you try to go through your life and be in the moment. And in that moment, you become that channel of unconditional love. And you have no needs. And the more you do that, the greater the moment becomes until you live in that moment. Right? But remember, you don't judge. Remember, the big thing is don't judge yourself for things that you think you're doing. Because once we think that we're separated from God, this is what happens. So it's good to notice. And then we can have the choice. Do I want to continue this, or do I want to have my perception changed? Do I want to see the truth? Okay. Paragraph 7. It is not love that asks a sacrifice, but fear demands the sacrifice of love. For in love's presence, fear cannot abide. For hate to be maintained, love must be feared, and only sometimes present and sometimes gone. Thus is love seen as treacherous, because it seems to come and go uncertainly, and offer no stability to you. You do not see how limited and weak is your allegiance, and how frequently you have demanded that love go away and leave you quietly alone in peace, in quotes. All right. So he's telling us love doesn't ask for any sacrifices. You don't have to give anything up. Right? He says fear demands the sacrifice of love. Right? Because in love's presence, fear cannot abide. Right? And that's one of the things we fear. This is the fear of God. Right? In the presence of love, the fear just can't be. The thought of separation can't be. The guilt can't exist in the presence of love. So for hate to be maintained, love has to be feared. We have to keep it at arm's distance. And only sometimes present and sometimes gone. You can only tolerate a little bit of it. Right? He says, so you don't see how limited and weak is your allegiance, and how frequently you have demanded that love go away and leave you quietly alone in peace. All right. Paragraph 8. The body, innocent of goals, is your excuse for variable goals you hold and force the body to maintain. You do not fear its weakness, but it's lack of weakness or lack of strength or weaknesses. Let me read that again. You do not fear its weakness. You don't fear the body's weakness, but its lack of strength or weakness. Would you know that nothing stands between you and your brother? Would you know there is no gap behind which you can hide? There is a shock that comes to those who learn their Savior is their enemy no more. There is a wariness that is aroused by learning that the body is not real. And there are overtones of seeming fear around the happy message, God is love. Okay? He says the body doesn't have any goals. The body, innocent of goals, the body is your excuse for the various goals that you hold. And you force the body to maintain. Once again, he's giving us the responsibility. He says your body doesn't do anything. It does what you tell it to do. It does what you want it to do. He says you don't fear the body's weakness. What you fear is that the body is not strong or weak. It's nothing. That's what you fear. You do not fear its weakness, but its lack of strength or weakness. He says, that's what you fear. The body is nothing. He says, would you know that nothing stands between you and your brother? Would you know there is no gap behind which you can hide? He says, would you know that there is no body? Excuse me. He says, there is a shock that comes to those who learn their Savior is their enemy no more. Right? The other. That thought of separation, it is no more. What we thought was our Savior, that belief in individuality. He says, sometimes it's a shock to know that it doesn't exist. There's a wariness that is aroused by learning that the body is not real. All right. So we have that awareness arises. Whatever true spiritual path you're on, all right, there'll come that time when you realize there's something beyond this. This is not it. This is not where it's at. Right? So all of a sudden there's a wariness. Like, where am I? What's going on here? There's a wariness that is aroused by learning that the body is not real. Right. She's just pointing these things out, not telling you you're wrong. You're not bad. You're not doing it. He's just pointing it out. Just observe. Oh yeah, that's where I'm at. And don't be afraid. Because there are overtones of seeming fear around the happy message that God is love. There seems to be overtones of fear around that. Because the form, what we perceive as tangible and sensible, right, is not real. So there's overtones of fear around that. Yet all that happens, paragraph 9, yet all that happens when the gap is gone is peace eternal. Nothing more than that, and nothing less. Without the fear of God, what could induce you to abandon him? What toys or trinkets in the gap could serve to hold you back an instant from his love? Would you allow the body to say no to heaven's calling? Were you not afraid to find a loss of self in finding God? Yet can your self be lost by being found? All right. He says, all that happens when this gap closes is eternal peace. As the prayer goes, the peace that passes all understanding. So that's the only thing that happens when the gap is closed, when the belief in separation is gone. That's the only thing that happens, is this awareness of eternal peace. This is nothing more than that and nothing less. Without the fear of God, what could induce you to abandon him? All right? What could make you abandon that peace? All right? If you didn't have the fear of God. All right? This is what toys or trinkets in this world, what toys or trinkets in that gap could serve to hold you back an instant from his love. What do we think is worth more? What is more valuable? What is that I want more than eternal peace? Just observe it. Don't feel guilty about it. It's good to point it out. Oh yes, I'm afraid of losing this. Don't worry about it. Ask for clarification. Help me to see this correctly. No one's going to, you don't have to sacrifice anything. Right? Love is not about the sacrifice. It is not love that asks for sacrifice. So if I notice, oh, I consider this to be very important, just ask for clarity. Help me to see this correctly. Because he's asking us, what in this world is more important than eternal peace? What is it you want more? What toys or trinkets could hold you back from an instant of his love? He said, would you allow your body to say no to heaven's calling? You know, the call of heaven is there, and we say, no, I got to take care of this. This is cool. I'm good. Would you allow the body to say no to heaven's calling? Were you not afraid to find a loss of self in finding God? So that's what he's saying. You're afraid of losing this form, this body. When you find God, when you find the truth. That's what Ram Dass was saying is the scary point on the spiritual path. He says, let me ask you this. He goes, can your true self be lost by being found? All right. Can you lose anything by remembering who you are? All right. And the answer is a rhetorical question. The answer is no. You don't lose anything. You find eternal peace. That's who you truly are. That's part of your nature. Your true nature is eternal peace. The same as God. It says, would you allow the body to say no? All right? If you weren't afraid to lose something, if you weren't afraid of the loss of self and finding God, yet, can your self be lost by being found? Just asking us to observe. Just observe. Don't call yourself names. Oh yeah, I think I am. I'm always saying no to God's call, to the call of heaven. I always turn away from peace. Don't worry about it. Just notice what happens when you turn away from peace. And then make a decision. And if you want to get back to peace, that's when you go to the mind and you contact the memory of the peace. We use words, Holy Spirit, Jesus. All right? Don't let the words deter you. All right? A lot of words carry a lot of baggage, especially in this Western world. It just so happens these are the words that came through Helen Schuckman. All right, try to get past the form to the formless, to the eternal peace. Because he says, you think you're going to lose? Could you lose yourself by finding yourself? All righty then. I could go on, but I'll spare you. All right, my friends, until we meet again. All right, don't judge yourself. Just observe and ask yourself, what is it that I want? Remember, eternal peace is the possibility, and it's inevitable once you've started. Okay.